We should be live. Can you double check?
I'm checking. Yep, we're live.
Okay. Sound is good. Things should be good. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's brand new episode of Courtcast. I am your host, Tim.
And I'm Mikey.
I'm Sahil. Welcome, everybody, to a brand new, exciting episode of Quirkcast. If you haven't already, do join our Discord channel. And if you're watching on YouTube, where we do this every Tuesday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, do ask us questions during the episode, and we'll get to them. So without further ado, let's get to it. Tim and Mikey, this is a interesting news came out last week of Microsoft finally unveiling their new quantum computing chip called I always struggle with the pronunciation of the name. Uh, actually, Mike, can you say the name? Because I feel like I'm going to say like marijuana spinner or something like marijuana one
Oh,
chip or something like that.
Majorana, yeah, just like to pretend the J and
Majorana,
the
yeah,
Y, yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, so they released that chip, and there's been a lot of buzz, and it takes a very different approach relative to the other players in the space. So we really want to dig into this and figure out, was what they're doing legitimate? Is there debunking to happen? Probably you can guess by this title, we're going to debunk things. So let's get to it. So I guess, Mikey, can you start off with a really lightning quick intro of like quantum computing? Why is it important? Why do people care about this?
All right, quantum computing elevator pitch. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, okay. So if you wanted to make a computer, and you wanted to use bits to make a computer, if you wanted to use bits that obey classical logic, um, like then a smart way to do it would be to just encode everything in binary, zeros and ones. And Alan Turing showed that if you encode everything in zeros and ones, you can perform universal computations, and thus was born the regular computer. But if you can create a computer that uses bits that obey quantum logic, which is different from classical logic, um, then this enables you to do certain things that a normal classical computer can't do, because classical logic is 0 or 1. Quantum logic, it can be 0 or 1 or everything in between. And so things like search become like very quick, because I don't have to search things one at a time. I can search everything at the same time. Things like sampling become
Mhm.
very efficient, because I don't have to sample things one at a time. I can just sample everything all at once. So it creates a certain like parallelization opportunity. Um, yeah, and this is just the benefit you get from making your computer out of bits that obey quantum logic. Um, there are many, many choices for what you could use, what kind of bits you could use that obey quantum logic to make such a computer. The most popular, okay, well, I'll just stop there.
Yeah, and I also want to say prime factorization is another example for those who are more savvy into this space. I guess, Tim, can you give the crux of what Microsoft has done? Like, why is this such a big deal? Like, is it just another quantum computer? Or, what's going on with that?
The crux is it's not a big deal. Basically, announce a chip, but we don't even know if the chip works. There's a Nature paper, and in fact, the editorial board in the Nature paper have a warning. They say that the paper does not prove that the chip works. So Microsoft had designed a chip called Majorana 1. It supposedly is able to manipulate what we call a Majorana 0 mode to do quantum computation. But guess what? No one has any evidence ever that they can produce and manipulate a Majorana 0 mode. And the same is true here. So for those of you who just read, for folks who just read online news articles, the title, and just say, hey, there's a paper, there's a product, it must mean that it works, right? No, nada. There is no proof that the chip even works. So I would say it's a nothing burger.
Wait, Tim, okay, so do you think it's fair to say that the gap between where they are now and a working prototype there's like a Nobel Prize worth of a gap between where they are now.
Yes. Like this is definitely Nobel
Uh,
Prize worthy. And I'll just say one sentence about what did they do in that paper. What they did was they create a way to measure the Majorana mode if it exists, but they have not proved its existence. So it's almost like, I don't know. It's like having a car, but if you have the brakes that work, but the engine, no one knows if it works or not. Like that's where it is. So maybe
no,
maybe
it's
they
like no, it's worse. It's like having a diagnostic tool for the car, and then people are out there thinking that you have a working car. That's what it sounds like from what you're saying.
basically. So I mean, yeah, they're trying to get their foot in the door of the Nobel Prize, but we're still years away. Years away.
Yeah. So I want to take a step back because Tim, you mentioned a lot of words and stuff that I want to like clearly give some intuition around. So I guess
Wait, hold on.
best place for us. Yeah.
Sorry, like before we change the topic, like okay, so so the topic is kind of like okay, crapping on Microsoft, and okay. Can I just say some words in Microsoft's defense, please?
Yes, as long as it
Okay.
introduce more jargon.
No, yeah, for sure. Well, so
Okay.
like, I just mean like from a soulful perspective, like. I think this is mainly because I spent time at UW, and for those of you that don't know, like there's like a strong University of Washington Microsoft connection, usually in the computer science department. But um, while I was there, there was a lot of people weren't as depressed back then about quantum computing, so there was a lot of crossbreeding. So I have some pride for Microsoft. So when I mentioned before that, um, making a computer using bits that obey quantum logic, that is the goal, right? We want to use what obeys quantum logic? Particles obey quantum logic. So if we can make a computer that uses particles to store information, then we're done, right? Okay, but then there's a whole bunch of choices for what you can do, like what kind of particles you can choose. um, so I guess for some reason there's a few different architectures for how you could imagine making such a computer. And for some reason the most popular seems to be the quote unquote superconducting quantum computing, which the more I think about it, the more there's like no information in there. Like every quantum computer requires superconductivity. So I don't know why that is chosen as the word to really make the distinction, but and this is like what Google, IBM, Rigetti, and this is okay. I don't know much about it, but I have a lot of I have a couple of close friends who work very closely with this technology, and the consensus seems to be that this is stupid. Um, the actual computation creates defects that ruin like future computations. So there's like a huge scalability problem, not just in qubit space, but in time space. And no one has a good idea for how to get around these issues, as far as I know, unless something drastic has changed in the last like 3 years. So those are kind of like that's kind of like the mainstream approach. And then you have okay, maybe instead of using like transistor like superconducting surfaces, maybe you can use like actual particles um, to store the information. So that's kind of the idea behind trapped ion computing. So there's companies like IonQ who go this route. The limitation there is it's very difficult to control more than like 50 ions at a time in a vacuum. So they can, but like from what I understand, this is like the trapped ion is like the researcher's dream because they can get like 50 qubits, very reliable computations. But above that, you gotta like bus classical quantum hybrid computation. Um, so those are like the two main types, I would say, the superconducting and then the trapped ion. You have like fringe ideas like with photonic quantum computing. There's a couple people trying to chase that, I believe. But then you have the mother of all, like, in my opinion, attempts at quantum computing. And this is mostly due to a paper that came out by, I believe, Alexei Kitaev, who's, he's the god of quantum computing theory. And he showed that if you can create a quantum computer out of a special type of particle called an enneon, then that computer would automatically, by default, have error correcting properties. And for those people who don't know, error correcting properties is a fundamental, like without error correction, there's no way that modern computers can work. There's no way quantum computers will work without error correction. So to find a hardware system that has error correction built into it, like you have to chase that. It's the most ambitious, like companies like Google and IBM, they're just trying to get more qubits so they can get the next Google News headline or whatever. But the way forward is anyonic quantum computing, and Microsoft is chasing it. And so I just think we have to give them their due respect for chasing like a long-term strategy.
I see. Could you delve more into the error correction piece, like for what Google and IBM are doing? Like, explain what error correction like means a bit more, and like how is that typically implemented?
So Google and IBM are not focused at all on error correction, as far as I know. But I think probably Tim could say more about the actual error correction process. But I just wanted, like, since you told me, I would just want to stress how impossible modern computers would be without error correction. The whole theoretical concept of reliable computing, like a computation that gives you the same answer every time, depends on this idea that if I can correct errors at a certain pace, then the errors will be suppressed exponentially, and I can basically think about it as 100%. And that's why your computers seem like 100% reliable machines, although they're not. It's error correction is a fundamental part of our computers, and they must be a fundamental part of any quantum computers that we make up. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, and I would say the typical quantum computers, it's still, error correcting is still a big problem because quantum computers are highly unreliable. It's because, a lot of them need to be super cooled, so thermal noise will get into the way. And there's what we call the decoherence time, meaning that the quantum properties will get destroyed just because the quantum system exists in the world and the world has noise. The quantum property could just get destroyed, and classical computers are much more immune to that because we got zeros and ones. But quantum computers, you can have anything in between, so it's much more prone to the error. And if you look at the Willow chip announcement, this is like a few months ago. We have an episode dedicated to that. What they show is that you can reduce error by combining more physical qubit into one abstract qubit. Just saying that, hey, if you group together like 7 or 9 qubits together, you're able to form one functional qubit with lower error. That's what they show, and it sounds so dumb, like so basic, but like, hey, guess what? We haven't shown that yet, and they were able to do it. So that was their announcement. You can check out our episode back then. So we're at these baby step right now. Like, we're not even talking about actually doing computation yet. We're talking about these tiny little baby crawls, not even baby steps.
I see. And so, like the idea of error correction, as far as I understand, is for each like qubit or even classical computers, for each bit, you need to incorporate like an extra amount of padding to account for like if that bit will have an error with it. Is that right? Or qubit?
That's normally, yeah. The only, I mean, the smartest way we know of to correct for errors is just to pack more copies. That is tried and true method, whether it's the classical version or the quantum version of that. I believe that the idea Microsoft is working on. Wait, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that also in that same vein? I believe it's like a little bit novel in that sense, no? In terms of like, it's not just pure redundancies, right? It's like, it's like a more advanced, sophisticated form of error correction.
I would say we're not even at the step of error correction yet. because no one has even found one qubit that works. No one.
No, but I'm talking about the dream, the eventual dream of what they're trying to do.
Well, I think the idea is if the Majorana zero mode
We all
is
agree that this is a hoax, right? We all agree that this is a hoax. But I'm just trying to say that the dream of what they're trying to do, I respect.
I would say that so I would say that the hope is that you would not need as much error correction, but probably you will still need a substantial amount. So we'll discuss in a little bit. So the difference between the Majorana mode and the typical quantum computer is that Majorana mode has this robustness. Because
Wait, hold on, wait. Let's choose a name for this, because you're calling it Majorana mode computing. I'm calling it Enion. So like, if we're gonna use jargon that no one understands, let's at least use the same.
Let's use Majorana, because I don't think anyone knows about Enion.
No, but Enion captures. Okay, fine.
All right, Mikey has conceded. Move forward. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, so the whole point of this thing is that you need some level of robustness in the data that you're computing, that you're manipulating, and why does Majorana mode does this? It does this through what we call topology, and I know it's a technical term, but topology, you can loosely think of it as some sort of obstruction. For example, if I make a knot, let's say I get a string and tie a knot. Doesn't matter how sloppy I tie that knot has some property that are unchanged no matter how sloppy I am with it. Like imagine I wind the rope once and tie a knot, or maybe more simply, I just wrap a rope around a pole once. No matter how sloppy my rope is, everyone will agree that I wrapped the rope around the pole once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times. So essentially, the Majorana mode is a way to turn electrons into something like a rope, and its job is to wrap around certain obstacles, and these obstacles actually exist in material, in such a way that computation is done by counting how many times you wrap your magical, electron Majorana rope around this obstacle, and that's what gives this robustness.
So you're saying because of the topological properties of, like, this analogy of wrapping it around, even if I wrap it really sloppily, or it's like, kind of all over the place, but everyone can agree that it's been like wrapped around essentially.
Right, exactly. So one has to understand, like, where does the quantum error comes from, right? Like, because in quantum physics, things can be in what we call superposition. It can be in between something, right? So if you have a traditional quantum computer, you have some bits that are between zeros and ones, maybe 50% 0, 50% 1, and maybe because of some noise, you get, now it's 49% zeros and 51% ones. Now there's an error, right? Mm-hmm. But for the Majorana zero mode, I wrap around a pole, some sort of pole in the material, obstacles. If this wrapping is a little sloppy, sure, you can look at the individual segment of this rope. Maybe it's a little different. It's pretty sloppily. But if you sum up all those contributions, at the end of the day, you will count one. You're just gonna count one wraps, right? So that's sort of the idea of the Majorana mode, where the quantum information is stored not by the particle itself, but it's stored by the overall. It's stored non-locally across the whole material. Just like how if you have a rope, how do you know that the rope is wrapped around a pole once? You have to look at the entire rope, follow it, trace it out. Mm-hmm. In the same way here. The quantum information is not stored locally in a small location. It's stored globally inside the material. That's why it automatically creates redundancy, so that the rope, the knot doesn't just destroy itself by random noise.
That makes sense. I mean, that explains why the other approaches, like the trapped ion and maybe the superconducting, whether we agree that's a good name or not. is more localized. Those are localized approaches,
Yes.
correct?
Yep,
Okay,
exactly.
okay, that
I want
explains that.
to take back my concession. I think any like I don't know that was confused. Like Majorana, like let me try another explanation for why I think okay this doesn't really capture the error correction part, unfortunately. So I'm not going to say this is equivalent to Tim's explanation, but this is
Mhm.
the way I think about it, right? Like so, um, if we look at nature, right, we have different types of particles. But the most important distinction between different types of particles is what spin they have. Are they bosons or are they fermions? Um, so you might know if you're familiar with physics that, you know, what's the difference between a boson and a fermion? Basically, each particle can be thought of as spinning, and some particles, for some unknown friggin' reason, just they spin at an integers multiple of Planck's constant, and others spin at half integer multiples of Planck's constant. But the thing to note is that when you write down the equations of bosons, let's say I have two bosons. If I switch them, my mathematical description of them remains unchanged. So these bosons are really identical. They're really, really, truly identical in the sense that, like, literally my full mathematical description, if I switch their places, is completely unchanged. If I have two fermions and I have them at different locations, and I suddenly switch their locations, these are identical particles. Let's say I have two electrons and I just swap their locations. These particles are identical, but when I swap them, my mathematical description picks up a minus sign. So even though these particles are identical, the situation where one is here and one is there is not the same as the one where I flip them. Like the mirror universe, in a sense, there's a difference between them because they're fermions.
Mikey, I want to give a quick example of this and allow you to continue just to just shed more light on this. So the fermions you're referring to, people can think of them as electrons. And what you're saying is that you can't have basically two electrons same exact state because if you swap them, you get something is equal to the negative of itself, which is zero, which means it doesn't exist, and which is why we have the periodic.
That's not. Yeah, I'm going to clarify. That's not what I'm saying. Yeah. I'm saying so. It's not that it doesn't exist. It's just that. So
The state can't exist.
Right. It's like, sorry.
Yeah.
When I write down the theory of two electrons, I can write down like the mathematical theory of two electrons, right? And if I write down the mathematical theory of those two electrons with their positions swapped, those two theories are the same up to a minus sign, actually, though. One is negative of the other.
Yeah, but let me clarify this. Yeah, but a lot of times the negative sign doesn't matter, right? Like for example, if you only care about the square of something.
But here it does.
no, but I think the crux is here it doesn't. And that's why it's so difficult. If you just like you can ask the question, why can't I do this in a hunk of metal? A hunk of metal, just random metal. A hunk of metal is made of electrons. You can move electrons all day long, left and right. You pick up a negative sign, sure, but if you flip them twice, you get +1, so it cancels out.
Yeah.
So you never get this computational power, right?
Yeah.
The computational power.
That's what I was saying. Because like, okay, so that's basically the story with bosons. Okay, so but like in the 80s, right? Frank Wilczek published this kind of crazy paper that showed that if you look in 2 dimensions, if you consider just a 2-dimensional universe, not a 3-dimensional universe, this can only happen in 2-dimensional universes, 2 plus 1, you can have particles that are not just bosons and fermions, but they can be fractional. They can be not just 0 or 1, they can be 0, a quarter, an eighth, like anything. And it's very special to 2-dimensional space that this allows this to happen. And the consequence of this is now, so if I took 2 bosons and I swap them, it's the same. If I took 2 fermions, I swap them, it's a minus sign. If I take, and he called these particles anyons because they can have any spin, literally any spin that's equivalent to a rational number these particles can have. And if you take these particles, if you swap them, let's say you rotate them around each other like clockwise, then you pick up, and let's say they're not bosons or fermions, they're some fractional particle. Then they pick up, like, let's say, a quarter. And then if I spin them more, they pick up another quarter. And then if I rotate them in the other direction, then they go down a quarter. So basically, like, I can, how these particles rotate around each other, I can now keep track of more than just binary. I can keep track of like 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8. And if I build a quantum computer out of these parts, I can be more confident about the history of like how the computation happened, because there's only one unique way to get to a certain configuration when you're keeping track of how these things wrap around each other. Does that make sense? Maybe that was.
I mean, yeah, to a certain degree. So what you mean is that there's more flexibility in these systems. Like instead of the +1 and -1, when you swap them, you get something like more in between. So I guess what was the point of this like extra, like, I guess, nuance or whatever you want to call it, like this 1/4? Like why is that important?
Because that difference is what drives the computation, right? Let's say we want to do something dumb. I just want to add like 3 + 4. You know, if you just have if you just have a plus and minuses, you can't do that. If you flip them once, let's say boson, nothing happens, right? So you can't do computation. If you do, if you have typical fermion, like a normal electron in a normal hunk of metal, you just get either positive or negative, positive or negative. You can't do computation with that, right? But imagine I have something, let's say it's 1/7, right? Then I can be like, hey, I wrap this once, twice, 3 times, that represents 3, and wrap them around 4 more times, that represents 7. Then I can like tally them up and actually do computation. So this subtle way in which I can braid it's like braiding a knot and counting them. This is how computation can be done, and this gives you computational power.
Yeah, well, it's almost like
Makes sense.
it's almost like it's like keeping a record. Like let's say, like, have you seen those when you're on the streets, they might put like 2 dice under a cup and they like move them around and you got to keep track of it, you know? Like, you know, which cup is the dice under, and you guess wrong and then you lose your money or whatever. But imagine that they had strings attached to them. So whenever they swap them around, you could, like, the strings would wrap around each other. So you could go back and just trace back like which one started with the dice, right? So that's kind of how the error correction works. It's like a very elegant, like, beautiful approach to error correction. It's very different from just like a typical redundancy. So you got to think that this is what nature does, right?
Interesting. So I want to be mindful of the time and want to jump to audience questions.
Yeah.
So does anybody know about decoherence times? As we mentioned, like the time it takes the quantum computer to go from a quantum like esque to classical.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that the decoherence time is the biggest problem in quantum computing. Quantum processes decohere; they lose their quantum information to the environment because of noise. But for the case of Majorana mode, because it is what we call topological, it actually doesn't lose that. But if the temperature is high enough to destroy the system, let's say you make a knot out of these Majorana mode. But let's say that there's too much thermal noise, it just breaks the string, metaphorically speaking, then you could lose it. So, but I don't know what that translates to decoherence time, but I think generally it's relatively safe. But in Majorana mode, just braiding around is not enough to do all quantum computation. This is called, because the braiding gates, just using braiding does not allow to do all computation. So they still need some other ways of doing calculation that are more similar to traditional means. So I believe there will still be a decoherence time. But like I said, no one has ever created a Majorana zero mode yet. So we have no clue, even like, I guess there's some theoretical hints maybe, but people have no idea really what the decoherence time for those is. So it's all speculative.
Yeah, but I would just point out that at least it's speculative because we know the decoherence times for superconducting quantum computers are terrible. And as I mentioned, the actual computation creates defects, which makes it pretty much impossible to scale the decoherence times out past a certain point. So a place like again, just to Microsoft's credit, like they're choosing a strategy where at least we don't know. It's not like it's not like definitely a dead end like a lot of these other companies.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to jump to the next question. If anything, though, doesn't the hype, regardless of it being a hoax, inspire more minds to apply themselves to advancing the science?
I
Maybe
would
this is a good. I mean, this is basically Tim's.
yeah, I would maybe part of that is true, but I think this is this has always been a problem when
Yeah.
corporations try to get into scientific research, right? Like in science, sometimes research don't yield results, and I'm pretty sure that the researchers at Microsoft is very competent. But I bet you the conversation they had with the management is that, hey, guess what? Google has announced their Willow chip. We gotta
Oh
push
yeah.
something out too, right? But like, this might run a one chip. Like
Not it.
they clearly haven't demonstrated it. Otherwise, they would have written a paper, right? Like this is a premature product. It's just for good
Hey,
press.
premature. That's a very nice description. Don't be nice
Yeah,
on my account.
I'm sure one day maybe they will succeed, but like science doesn't have a definitive timeline. Science is not like, hey, in 2 quarters we'll get it done. No, like this, and this is the problem. I think this hype is just it's just ridiculous. Like it's taking away some real advances. Like real advances come from like actual research being done carefully and not just like some overhyped press release. Yeah, like you don't hear some paper on archive getting published and they get all the reporters go to them and be like, hey, that good job. You don't see that, right? But that's where
Sometimes you do that.
sometimes you do, but like the real results come from there, not from these like overhyped press release, I would say.
Definitely, no disagreement there.
Yeah, it was refreshing to hear. Okay, next question. Since quantum computers have values between 0 and 1, i.e., they aren't binary, would they be considered analog?
I would
Kind of. They're kind of yeah.
yeah.
That's funny. They kind of are, yeah.
But they're analog except one difference. They are exponentially powerful because they can explore all possibilities
Analog doesn't
exponentially.
mean not exponentially powerful.
Yeah, exponential analog. How about that?
No, I really like actually I really like that because it highlights something that I keep touting. It's like people always say, "Oh, once we have quantum computers, we're going to be able to break RSA." It's like, do you realize we're going to be able to simulate a patch of the universe that is indistinguishable from the regular universe well before we're able to simulate RSA. We'll be able to make universes that no one can distinguish from the real universe. It just shows you that in order to break RSA, we have to be gods first. So RSA is pretty damn good. Yeah, because basically it is an analog computer. You're making a computer out of reality, which is what probably our reality is made out of.
Yeah. Okay, and then this was a question probably for a while back. Is the boson comment referring to Andrew Child's Hamiltonian explanation of quantum
No,
walks?
no, no. I mean, maybe, but I don't know what that is. So I'm sorry.
All right. Well, so we're almost at time. So I wanted to give you guys a chance in our usual tradition to leave the audience with any words of wisdom that quantum computers and or Microsoft has taught you over the years.
Let's just go easy on Microsoft. It's not their fault. You know, they're really the best out of the bunch. I think they should be saluted, and to see them lowered to this kind of like clickbait hype is a little sad. But I think they'll stay strong.
I mean, I think you all know my opinion. I think it's but I understand the corporate world. I mean, I this is a high risk endeavor, but I do hope that the public have eyes on the actual research as opposed to these hyped up press release. And I know we didn't dig into the details of the physics. Hopefully, we can cover that in our next episode. But there are some real interesting physics within the idea. But the Nature paper and the Majorana 1 announcement doesn't really highlight any of it, unfortunately.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean it's a shame, but yeah. So on that note, if you all are interested in a deeper dive, send us what topics you want us to cover in terms of like any particular part of the physics, anything we can clarify for the next episode. So on that note, we'll see you all next week.